Okay, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'd like to welcome you to the February 20, 1921 CNC SIG for the San Diego Fine Woodworkers Association. And we're glad to have you here today. So far, 13 have joined and more are going to be on the way. As always, this will be posted on the San Diego Fine Woodworking Association website for future reference. Today, we have a couple of members that are going to be talking to us about their experiences with the new Shapeoko Pro CNC machines that they're just receiving and starting to put together. And then we're also going to be talking a little bit about the personalized, the effort for personalized gifts for Mother's Day that's going to be on the association website. So with that, I will turn it over to Travis, and Travis, get us started.
Great, thanks. And I have to tell you, this is the first Zoom call in 1921 that I've been a part of. It was the first time I heard that particular date, and it was kind of funny to hear that. Hi, everybody. The genesis of today's call was a conversation that Ed and I had, and it centered around just a serendipitous event, which was Ed was looking for an agenda. I happened to receive a Shapeoko Pro XL, and so too did Joe. Joe and I have been in conversation for how many months, Joe? Months.
A few.
Yeah. The point is that we had both been wanting a particular kind of machine, and he was looking across the board, and I was looking at a more limited scope, which was where Shapeoko was going next. And we both happened to be early recipients of their XL machine. We'll get into that in just a second. But I thought a kind of fun way to start this off would be for you folks to hear the story of Shapeoko. I mean, where did it come from? And you can see from where it started through to the present, the trajectory that it's on and how we get to where we are right now. So I intend to tell this little story, share a little bit about my Shapeoko XL, ask for Joe to give all his thoughts, etc. And then we have the second agenda item, which is we are in our efforts to generate funds for the association, especially to operate the shop in a way that is continually profitable, doing some fundraising through making products and selling them. It's traditionally been our holiday gift sale, but while it is a fundraiser, it's also a great chance to learn new skills, do design, spend time with people on projects, get together regularly, participate in the community. There's so many other good things that come from it. And we have Peter to tell us about one example of that. And so we'll get to that as a second agenda item. Before I get started, anything that you wanted to add before we get going there? Any of the hosts, Ed, Peter, or Joe?
Nothing from here, Travis.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to go through a few, let's see, websites. Let me see what I know how to do it here. Doggone it. Bear with me. Okay, hopefully that loads. Okay, let me see if I can share that screen now. Yes. Okay, so this story I want to tell you really starts in around 2005. In 2005, there was this guy named Chris Ford, and he was somebody who was just working in a college job, doing something really mundane at a manufacturing shop. And he looked across the aisleway, and there was this machine that was doing CNC type work. And he just fell in love with the notion. It was something that he, within a few years, decided he wanted to try himself. And so around 2007, he started to participate in online forums. A CNC Zone was a particular community that he was a part of. And he just started to iterate on CNC mills. This is in the Chicago area. He was experimenting, iterating, wanting to figure out how it is that he could make one that was really good for himself, and even better still, maybe one that he could sell. And he eventually, in 2008, did a Kickstarter on a kit that was going to be available. Here's an example, for instance, of many of the, how do I show that? Okay, this is an example of a rendering he did of many of the iterations that he went through. But as he's going through and learning about CNC and growing towards building a kit and doing a Kickstarter, he does a Kickstarter, I think it was for like $500 kits. Weren't that many people who signed up. But coincidentally with that CNC Kickstarter that he did, somebody else had just finished a Kickstarter for something called the Maker Slide. And that's this extruded aluminum right here, which could be used for guide rails on a CNC. And the innovation on there is right here, where you see that on the extrusion, you do have a ridge that you could use to guide the CNC using V-wheels. And that innovation was done by a guy named, let me see if I got a picture of him here. Yeah, so we got Bart Dring. He was the one who came up with the rails. Christopher Ford is the one who was doing all this iterating on CNCs. And together they started to make kits available for the Kickstarter and beyond. But it was completely consuming their lives. They were engineers, had livings. They were doing this nighttime thing through the forums. And they also had this constraint that their key ingredient, this Maker Slide, the extruded aluminum with the rails on it, was something which could only be done in batches. So they had a company they'd go to, and when they go to that company, the company would say, well, your minimum order is such and such number of feet, and they'd have to accumulate orders, and then they would do a batch, and then they package and kit and sell it out. And it was just really dragging them down. So in Chicago is another company that's called Inventables. Inventables was originally a company that just sold materials that you couldn't normally get in small quantities. This is as the maker movement is sort of taking off around the country and the world. And people might want to get some really interesting, exotic acrylic, or might want to find woods that they couldn't find elsewhere, special machining materials or parts. That's what they were doing at the time, but they were in Chicago. Bart and Chris were in Chicago, and they met at a makerspace in Chicago and decided that they would collaborate, where Inventables brought in all of their, we can take orders, we can do kits, we can do fulfillment, we can do all these sorts of things. And Chris and Bart, you guys are CNC guys, you can work on the product side. And so they came out with the Shapeoko 2, which is frankly this machine right here, right there. It was a little like 14 by 14 inch enclosed area. It didn't use a really big spindle. The belts you can see here are actually suspended up in the air as opposed to down along the rail. It was really kind of frustrating because you'll notice there's this front black panel and this back panel that's black and this front panel that's black. And they were there to give rigidity to this structure, but you couldn't put any materials in from the front that protruded out the back. It was this confined space. And yet that's what they collaborated on to get the Shapeoko 2 into the marketplace. And this is the Shapeoko 2. Well, eventually they had a little bit of a falling out, and the Inventables company continued from their materials and went on to do their own version of a Shapeoko, which they called the X-Carve. And they've continued to do the X-Carve. As a matter of fact, now they have an X-Carve Pro as well. It is slightly different. You can see its rails are much thinner. I think the rigidity is not nearly as stable. The Pro is different. I think that's what we see here is the Pro. And it's going to be a hardier machine. But Inventables continued on with their version of the CNC. And Chris went on to partner with the folks at Carbide 3D. That's a company up in Torrance. And Carbide 3D already had some expertise. They were making this Nomad 3, which is a much smaller CNC. It is an enclosed CNC. It has stepper motors with much greater precision, much less power, but greater positioning control. And so you could do things like soft metals and small things very precisely. They also really specialized in, for instance, jigs and fixtures that allow you to do two-sided milling and some really special small stuff. But in particular, they also had some software skills. They created this Carbide Create, which was for design, and they had Carbide Motion, which was used for, it doesn't list it here, but Carbide Motion, which was used for control. So when Chris went to Carbide 3D, he was adding a big CNC to their small CNC, and he was getting the benefit of software, where folks at Inventable went ahead and continued with CNC and made their own version of Shapeoko. So you've seen here a couple of change points. One was post the Kickstarter. You had Drum and Ford get together and just do kits. Then they got together with Inventables, came up with the Shapeoko 2, which had some constraints, but was a very affordable CNC. It was under $1,000. Then you saw it join forces, Chris bringing Shapeoko to Carbide 3D, and you have a greater variety of things, including a smaller CNC and software. And one of the important things that happened probably was about 2 years ago. I can't remember, maybe somebody on this call does remember, but there was a guy named Luke in the UK. Luke was an enthusiast of the Shapeoko and CNC, and he was really determined to bring some hardiness to the platform. The first thing that he did that was of consequence, as far as Shapeoko was concerned, was he made something called the HDZ. I don't know if we have any owners of the Shapeoko with the HDZ, but that was a Z head that was much more rigid, much more hefty, much hardier, could really give you much better steady control on the Z axis.
Yeah, that's the one, Travis. That's the one I got when I ordered mine last year.
So you got the HDZ or the Plus?
The HDZ.
Okay, excellent. So I knew that Mark did, and so you got the Z2. Really made it for a much improved, more rigid machine. But Luke then joined Shapeoko, and so behind the scenes has been working with them to come up with a more robust version of the Shapeoko, sort of incorporating some of the things that he had been doing with the HDZ, but more across the board. And that's where you end up with the Shapeoper Pro. It came out, I think, in the XXL version, because they didn't release it across their family of product. And for everybody's information, there are 3 Shapeoko 3s. There's the small one, which is called the plain Shapeoko 3. It has a cutting area of 16 by 16. There's the XL, which is basically twice that 16 by 16 wide. So it's like 32 by 16. And then there's something that's 4 times the Shapeoko 3. It's like 32 by 32. And they knew that they were going to have to bring this to market, iterate on it to make it scalable, to get all bugs out, etc. So they started with the one that was the most costly, which was the XXL. And it was towards the end of last year that came out. They did that for several months. And then I think it was just a matter of 2 or 3 weeks ago, Joe, that they posted that we could purchase the XL version, which was half the size of the XXL. And Joe and I were back and forth in text and email. Within minutes, we had both ordered ours. The consequence of being an early adopter is that it's not quite perfect in its delivery form that we had to the 2 of us. But it's exciting enough to change that we wanted to take the opportunity to share with our community, who anybody who was trained in the shop was trained on a Shapeoko. And the reason they were trained on a Shapeoko is because we needed to have a couple of machines. We could afford them. And because it came with software and it was affordable, and people could actually then go on and buy their own CNC if they wanted in a very affordable fashion. It was a good starter package. And so now we have, I think, 107 people who have been trained in using the Shapeoko. And had people going all sorts of different directions. But it's been sort of a seed for us to build a community, out of which then Ed's special interest group has been going for over a year, and it's a chance for us to touch base on things. So I wanted to give that backstory, just because it gives you a sense of how a guy with an idea and a passion could end up taking this places that well, are now a small company with a good brand and a wide variety of products. And it's just an interesting backstory. Before I go on to showing you folks the old Shapeoko and the Shapeoko Pro, are there any questions about that backstory, or anybody else have any experiences themselves with Shapeoko over the years? Thank you for jumping right in. Thank you for adding to the story. Really appreciate it.
You're just doing a great job, Travis.
Oh, thank you, James. So that's the backstory. Now let's talk about the CNCs. And if you wouldn't mind, Ed, would you please focus on my other video, my phone?
There you go.
Okay, great. So you don't need to look at me anymore. You need to look at Shapeoko. So this is the Shapeoko that most of us were familiar with. You can see that it has steel plate in the front and in the back. And between the front and the back, there is no structure underneath. It is front to back held together with MDF. Okay, so it is the MDF that gives it its XY rigidity, and it's really tacked down quite a few times across the front. So it's decent, and it certainly served us well. Here you can see, if you look closely, the maker slide, the ridge right there that allows you to have them be Y guided by these V wheels. And you can see that the belt is still what drives it. It's actually a feature of the Pro as well. In the Z-axis here, this is the original belt-driven Z-axis. And it's using some aluminum rails on either side that, again, with V wheels, are what keep the Z in place and move it up and down. Now, if I were going to say one feature that I believe is not great with this old version of the Shapeoko, it was that Z was dependent on this belt. And we had problems with it in the shop. It's why we upgraded all our heads to the Z Plus, which is a screw-driven Z axis. But this is what was the Shapeoko 3 for quite a long time, until the HDZ, the head that Ed purchased and that Mark Stuke purchased and others purchased, was sort of, the HDZ is like the super hefty version, it's the Hulk, and then the HD Plus is the replacement standard Z head for the Shapeoko 3. And it has many of the features. It just can't handle as heavy a spindle. It's not as rugged. It's not the Hulk. It's some other superhero that's not quite the Hulk. Anyhow, this is the classic Shapeoko 3 ever since they joined forces with Carbide 3D. And it serves extremely well for many things, especially with the Z Plus head. It's a great machine. At, I think it's now $1,300. It's a pretty good entry-level machine. Now, here we have the, and tell me if I need to yell any louder, okay? But here we have the Shapeoko Pro. I'm going to be pointing out a few things, and then I'm going to bring my calipers over and show you some differences. But just visually, look at this plate here and compare it to this plate. I mean, we're definitely getting much beefier. I want you to notice too that
are they both steel, or is that thicker one aluminum?
no, they're both steel. They're both steel.
Both?
This one's just really, really.
That's a big chunk of steel. Yeah.
It really is. You can't see inside of the aluminum rail, but it is the same width, but it is thicker. The walls are thicker on this as well. Now, here's the big, big difference as far as I'm concerned. And I didn't finish assembling it just so I could show you this. These three base frame are very long aluminum extrusions. And these are the plates. Let me just show you one that hasn't been put down. This is what makes the bed. It's a series of 9 of these that go across, and they're all screwed in multiple times with, as you can see, I'll point to it. As you can see here, these are screws that are going to be centering and adding a lot of stability. You have 6 screws on any one of these, and you have a frame that is just going to be super, super sturdy. Now, it's okay to have a good, super sturdy frame, but if your head isn't traveling in a predictable, unwavering way, then you're not going to get necessarily good results. But that was the other major, major change on this. We have linear bearings on rails now. These are for, I'm showing you now, the right side of the y-axis. And you can see here on the gantry, we have twin rails with twin linear guides. So this is like just super, super tough, really hardy. Now, I've talked with several people about this, and the one thing that they would say doesn't quite go full hardy is that it still uses belts. Okay, so we have a belt drive system here on the stepper motors for moving the y-axis to and fro, as well as the x-axis. Here's the belt here, along the rails here. So what did Carbide 3D, Shapeoko in particular, do to address that? Now I want to transition to calipers. So just as a for instance, on this metal right here is, and we're in millimeters, so 3.5 millimeters basically. Now we're up to almost 13 millimeters for the thickness of that front metal. That's just an example of the beefing up that they did. Let's do the belt. Now, the belt here is 8 millimeters, almost 9. Let's say 9. Over here, we're at 15. So we have some real beefing up of the belts, and they've gone to, let me show you by way of an example here. I was going to show you the steel belt that is inside. Here it is. So what they've done also is, if you, I don't think you could see it. Inside, this is some leftover steel belt, but it's steel belted. If you look right on the edge right here, you can see the strands of metal that are inside the belt. That means no stretching. And with the extra width, it's supposed to be really, really rigid. So there are those who would say they would like to have seen a screw-driven series of axes. That's not what Shapeoko opted for. And yet I'm still really, really thrilled. This thing is going to be so tough. Let me also show you that the aluminum extrusions that form the bed have these Mdf insets. So I'll be able to produce these things whenever I need a new Mdf bed. And they sit in there, and you can see that we've got, I'd say a little over a 1/4 inch. Let's find out exactly. So we're at, yeah, a little over a 1/4 inch of protrusion above. And you've got the recesses in there for all your screws to mount it. But it came with a clamping system. No great shakes there, but that was cool. It also came with their Sweepy 2, which is their second iteration on the dust collection system. My bias is that I don't like this as much as I do what we had on the old Sucket dust vacuum system, because this you set to the height of the top of your cutting material, and so the bristles were always touching the surface of your material, and you can move the head up and down, and the suction stayed in place. Here, the bristles will rise and fall with the end mill. So when you start milling, let's say a 1/2 inch in the air, you've got gap between your bristles and your cutting surface, and so the vacuum isn't as good. It's not a huge thing, but I really think they should be improving upon that. A couple other things. You see they have now cable, what are these called again? Doug?
What's that?
What are these things called again?
Oh, those are drag chains.
Drag chains, right. So we have dual drag chains now. And there's a lot of room in these drag chains. The only reason I point that out is because Joe and I have been going back and forth on what to use as a spindle. I've just by default used the Makita / Carbide 3D because I happen to have had it. But I would very much like to beef it up. This is a 65mm clamp for the spindle, and there are 65mm spindles out there. But as I've been talking with Doug about different ideas, I'm going to need to still bring my 220 over to this side of the house. I'll probably wait until we get an 80mm clamp here so I can put in a larger spindle. As Joe had pointed out to me, you can get larger collets, larger bits, etc. And so I'm going to go with this until they come up with a larger clamp, and I get my 220 moved over to this side of the garage. But that is, in a nutshell, the Shapeoko Pro. It's a silly little thing, but I absolutely love, is they actually moved the power switch to the front. It used to be on the power cord, and that was just drag. Also, the bit setter is built in. It's just a standard feature. This is how you get your consistency of the
Depth.
placement of the end of your end mill. So if you say 0 is right here with an end mill, and you change the end mill, it comes back here and gets the 0 set automatically, but coming down and synchronizing with what the last 0 was. So as you do multiple bit changes, you only have to set 0 once in the beginning, and every bit after that is the same through this automatic bit setting routine. So that's that in terms of the Shapeoko Pro. And maybe, Joe, maybe if I can turn it over to you to talk about your assembly of it. Could you, Ed, get rid of this phone and go back to the regular?
Yeah.
Just a question, if I may ask, what's the Z drive? Is it a belt or a screw on the new one?
Let's take a look, because that is, it's a screw. And I could show it to you. Ed, you want to just one more time, give me the camera? So there's the screw right there.
They had enough problems with the belts that they don't even ship the belt system anymore.
Yeah, and here's the, so vertical rails also, as you can see, one vertical rail here, the other over there, and then the screw in between. So this is the Z plus type head. It's not the HDZ, but it's, I mean, it's definitely hardy. When you pick up this head, you're picking up a lot of weight. There's steel all over the place in this thing. Look at how thick those sheets are. Oh, another thing that's different is these have Hall effect. These have Hall effect sensors, so they're contactless magnetic sensors for your end stops. So this approaches here and it senses magnetically rather than triggering a switch. That too is a change across the whole machine. And it was remarkably, I've assembled many Shapeoko over the years, and go ahead and cut me out again, please, Ed. They were imprecise and messy and difficult in the beginning. I don't know how long if I had gone at it flat out, but I would guess maybe it's a 4 or 5 hour assembly undertaking. And I don't know, Joe, why don't you tell us about your experience when you got it and how long it took and whatever came up in your assembly?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm gonna try and, I don't know how you do the phone, Travis, but I got it on my phone, but is there a way that I can show with the phone like you did?
Yes, so 2 things have to happen. Ed, if you wouldn't mind seeing his phone and spotlighting it, and then Joe, you just need to tap your screen, and in the upper left-hand corner, there will be a little camera that allows you to flip to your backside camera.
I don't see a second login from you, Joe.
Yeah, you have to have Zoom on your phone.
You have to be logged into the Zoom session on your phone.
Yeah, I got it. It's, you'll see it with a D, Joe Dokaliak.
Looking.
You see that on there?
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
And so he'll spotlight you, which means your camera will be working. Now
I
you
just
just need,
don't show your video turned on the phone.
so you need
Just
to turn your
starting-
video on.
Start video. Okay, got it.
There we go.
And now you need to choose the other camera.
Oh, there we go.
Get your face. Perfect.
All right.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, you got to remember, this is my first CNC and I don't know very much about it, but I knew that this is something that I wanted to become involved in. So I was doing a lot of research. I ended up with the XL and I was waiting for that because that's the only space I have. But you can see that I have all the, they call this the hybrid table, and I have that completely assembled. And I left all the wiring exposed. And this took me probably a day because I triple checked everything as I was assembling it and had, once again, no experience in this realm. But I waited for this because I thought it was the best bang for the buck. And so I left all the wires exposed as I'm initializing this machine. And you can see that all the connectors are basically all plug and play. And they're all labeled. And the instructions that go with it were very rudimentary and very, very understandable, even at my level. And that I needed that for sure. And as I show you, this is the Z-axis connectors. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And they're just plug and play, and they're well marked out. You can see where it says, X motor goes to X motor and so on. And I did have an issue where the proximity switch, as soon as I opened it up, one of the wires was disconnected and they sent me a new one. And the only other issue I had was there's little filler strips. If you notice, when you complete this hybrid, these little slots right here, they'll drop down. And now they apparently have these little, Travis told me that they have these little filler strips that they're giving you. And so I requested that. They sent them. However, they sent me for the larger machine, and they're going to resend for the smaller machine that I have here, which will be real nice. Because I was going to devise a little hook coat hanger thing, because if you drop anything down there, you're going to have to go in through the side.
So this is just a little thin strip of plastic or something that
Correct.
goes along the bottom.
Think of it like a Venetian blind. It's just to block it from getting through that crack.
Yeah.
And just
all
so
the
everybody
stuff.
knows, we didn't say it, but where he's pointing to right now, that is a T-slot. So you've got built-in hold down across the entire bed. See the T there? So that is just like fantastic, that you've got that built-in hold down clamping technique, just part and parcel of the design of the system.
Is that a proprietary T, or is it like Craig or other?
Let me just show you. I don't think that it is proprietary, but it's not one that I personally have used before. Let me
Okay.
show you.
All right, just curious. Thanks.
Are the T's metal or some sort of composite plastic or something? The piece that slides in.
This part here?
You're right, the piece that slides in the T slot, because you would have a small little rectangular piece with a hole in it that you would thread your screw into. That's how you use the T slot. I was wondering if those were metal or whether they were some sort of composite material or plastic.
Which part again? Sorry, Doug.
Oh, you're
the-
talking about this part I'm holding here?
Nope, the piece that goes in the T slot.
Oh, okay, so let me
Like
just show
you
you.
had your clamp.
Doug,
Oh,
can you look at
round. Round, that even makes it easier.
Doug? Look at mine. Can you see my little video?
Oh, okay, yeah, now I see it.
So it's an aluminum,
almost round.
and it's round on the front and back, but it's flat on the sides, so it slides in.
That looks
it's threaded.
proprietary. Is that
Yeah.
metric?
Yeah, I think it's an M5 threading.
No, this is made in the US, but it's metric.
Everything about it is metric in terms
Okay,
of
right.
its build. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so that just, I wanted people to see what the T-slot, the T was like. Sorry, go Joe, go ahead.
Oh, so this is the material that they're showing, or that actually slides in and will fill in the little slots here. It's HDME, and so anyway, I'm waiting for the right size. I was going to show you the controller, and that was about it. But it's all plug and play, and I hope you can see. It's probably pretty dark. Let me see if I get a flashlight here.
If I can, I was wondering if maybe Travis and you could each take some pictures of your controllers with your phone. You can send them to me later.
So you want to reverse engineer this too, huh, Doug?
Yeah.
Well, I've got a project that if we have some time, I'll tell you about.
Happy to send it to you, Doug.
I'm pretty excited about it.
Cool.
Yeah, and this was pretty straightforward. The instructions cover it very well, and it's well documented. And it's all plug and play, and it was really simple for me to do. Very, very, very easy. So I left everything exposed as I initialized, and I'm still having a couple issues as I do try to initialize it, but I had to reset the proximity switches. They were misadjusted. I don't know if you had that problem, Travis, but I did.
I had one that was not low enough, and so it would get bumped.
Correct. I had 2 of those, and I'm still having tracking problems on my Y, and I was going to talk to you. I'll send you a video.
Okay.
But that's basically about it.
But
I don't know.
Let's dwell a little bit also on some of the downsides. You and I jumped onto this really early. So you already mentioned, for instance, that when they sent you the plastic slot blocking strips, you got for the larger machine.
Correct.
Right? You didn't get them for this machine. When we received packets of bolts, there are a few instances where we received more than we needed just because they sent us from the XXL as opposed to the XL. My Y end stop sensor was about 2 millimeters too high. So when I originally did my initialization, it bumped into the sensor rather than being triggered by the sensor. And so these are things which, frankly, anybody would go through when they were first releasing a product. And Joe and I are like right out of the starting gates here. They were the first people to receive this thing. But those were issues that we encountered. And it wouldn't be fair to just make it seem like it was a total dream, because I didn't even get my black strips. They're sending them to me now, the ones that fill the gap. So there were little bumps in this, but what I've liked about Shapeoko from the very beginning is their customer support is really good. And you call, you talk, and they quickly sent the things that you need. And boy, that's worth a lot over time. And especially their online community, their forums are fantastic. And I've always liked that part of who they are. So that's one of the reasons I'm part of the community. I've got a long history with them, and I just like their machines.
So you don't have to wait till after 6 o'clock at night the next day to talk to get a response.
No.
China.
Yeah. No, the support is in Chicago and in Torrance.
You had mentioned getting 220. Would the 220 be for the spindle only? And the rest of it is 110?
No, I was talking to Mark Stuke last night, and we were talking about what our next toys would be. And my next toy after this is going to be an upgraded laser. You folks are familiar with Russ Sadler and his video series out of the UK that has been working on these Chinese lasers for years. And Cloud Ray is taking many of his ideas and putting them into a new release of a laser. And we'll see. Doug and I have been talking about this. We don't know what the price is going to be, but the idea is it's supposed to be a premium price, but for the inexpensive Chinese lasers. And I want my next one to be able to do 100 watts as opposed to 50 watts, and I need to upgrade. So I'll be using it on my next toy as well. But yes, for the CNC, it's just for the spindle and the controller for the spindle. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, just also for Paul's information, there is a 110 version of a spindle too, and you can run that controller and spindle off of 110 15 amp circuit. but Doug found a couple of places that said it just really wasn't hefty enough. What was it, Doug? He gave like 30% more than just the Makita or something, and probably wasn't worth the hassle.
Well, I'm just asking a question because do they see this platform expanding into like a water-cooled spindle?
Don't know. Much like Apple and other people, they don't actually talk about what's next. But I'm glad you mentioned water cooled because that really is my goal. I want quiet.
Right.
And to get that water cooled, Mark Stuck has a water cooled spindle and controller, much like the one
Right.
that Joe is looking at getting. And damn, it's quiet. I mean,
But
you
then
feel
that
your
would
wedding, but it's-
require in and out tubes of water in that drag chain. So hence the oversized drag chain for possible
Ah.
expansion. Got
I'm
it.
glad
Thank
you caught that, Paul. I skipped over that. I was talking about all the room in the drag chains. That's why I like all the room. I can probably put my tubing in there for the water flow.
Got it. Thanks.
You bet.
On the spindle voltages, it's all a matter of power because you're trying to get like, a couple horsepower type stuff. And generally it seems, and what I've seen in some of the forums, the market has decided to accommodate the low end side of things and come out with 120 volt spindles. And it turns out they have all the right numbers to make it look like, you're getting something that you want. But when you do all the math on the power and all that, it comes out that you don't get the full power out of it with the way it's put together. When you get a 220, 240 volt setup, you get all the power. You get 100% of the power that's spec'd. And what some people have been doing is they'll buy the 240 VFD and the 2 horsepower spindle, like it is, and they don't have 220, but they have a full 20 amp 220. And what they'll do is they'll go ahead and put a transformer.
Yeah.
Because when you're taking AC, one of the reasons why we have AC all over is because you look up on the telephone poles, they can change the voltage with just transformers. They're not active. They're just 2 coils of wire with different amount of wirings on each spin things. So the same thing you can do at your home in your garage. And I was just on a forum because I've been doing some CNC control stuff. I was just on a forum just like yesterday, Travis, and there was a guy asking about, hey, is this transformer going to be good for this 220 VFD? And yeah, it's some of the tricks you play, but Travis is doing it the correct way. He's probably putting 40 amps or 50 amps 240 right near his machine.
I just happen to have it in my garage because it charges my car. So, I just have to get it to the other side of the garage. That's all.
Oh, perfect. So you would, I mean, if you have the voltage, no, I'm sorry, if you double the voltage, then you have the current unless it's properly done.
Right.
So
I have 60 amps of 240 currently
for your
one
car.
corner of my
So
garage. So and it's
that's
used only at night, in the middle of the night, to charge. So it's
right.
completely available.
Yeah, you're all set up for it. So
Yeah.
good. Now, another question that just came to mind is the chiller for a future water-cooled spindle. Can the laser chiller do double duty for water-cooled spindle?
It absolutely can. I was talking to Mark about this. He started off originally with a sump pump, and it seemed to work fine, which means it's just a water reservoir is enough to actually do it for these spindles. But he went to the opposite extreme. He bought a CW 5200 just for his water-cooled spindle. Way, way, way overkill. But he just knew that he wanted to do some, larger production run type stuff. And so he really wanted to make sure it stayed cool. But these things are often bundled, just as with the smaller, less powered lasers, with just an aquarium pump. and they say
Yeah.
put that into a large 5-gallon reservoir and use that water, which apparently for spindles in less than full out production capacity is fine. But you're right, it can be used. You can use the chiller from your laser for the water to your spindle as well.
Yeah. Good.
And that's it, Ed, unless there were other questions.
Okay.
No,
I think
but
that's
Travis,
great. So I think what we do want to do is take a minute. I think, Peter, you're the one that is going to talk to us a little bit about the Mother's Day gifts.
Yeah, I just have, I think, 3 PowerPoint slides to show.
You should be able to share your screen.
You want me to get started with that then?
Yeah, go right ahead, please.
Okay, you should be looking at my PowerPoint here.
Yep. Yeah. We're looking at your second slide.
Ding, there we go. And ding, there we go. Okay, so I was, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago, I got an email from Tools Today that was advertising a plan for this heart-shaped little tray. And I thought, you know, I gotta, the shop has just opened up and I had some time on the CNC and I thought, well, let's get this thing and make one. Turned out that they were mostly interested in selling the bits to cut this thing,
Right.
which I didn't bite for. I bought the plans and I modified it to accommodate the bits that I already had. So here's just the, this is the final version that I made out of bird's eye maple. It went through a couple of iterations of pine. I destroyed a little pine in getting the offsets right and things like that. But this is the final version that I'm showing. So the blank for it is here. It's about a little less than 7 by 9, ½ inch deep. I don't even remember how thick the Tools Today plan was. But when I looked at what V-Carve was proposing for the time involved to cut the pocket out of the, with the Tools Today plan, it was like 4 hours. And I said, that's just not in the cards. So I came up with a thinner blank, a less deep pocket. It uses 3 tools. So there's basically 2 changes in the design. They had, I think, 5 different tools, but I was able to simplify it. And then, so the round over, of course, cuts the edge. The end mill clears out the pocket, and then the V-bit does the lettering. In pine, it took about 30 minutes to cut it, and in this bird's eye maple, it took a little longer. It really is significantly harder than pine. So I sent this to Travis just to say, here's a picture of something I made. Maybe you want to show what something has been done on the CNC, and suggested that we might be able to do this for Mother's Day, because it seemed to me that you could make a bunch of blanks of this, and then you could come back and cut whatever message you wanted to put into it. So I've thought about how to make this in a little larger quantity. You could, on the XXL, or even just on the XL, you could take a 30 by 9 inch board and get 4 trays in it, maybe even 5 if you kind of stick the point of the one down into the space of the other. Or you could go with 3 on a 30 by 7 inch board. And then you could, just set it up and let it cut the edges, come back and change for the pocket. and then you'd be done with that. And then the idea would be that you'd take those and finish them, and then come back and cut the lettering when you knew what lettering was going to be wanted. And to do that efficiently, I think you would need to make a dedicated holder for these things. It
Yeah.
seems to me you just take a piece of MDF and create a recess that into which this heart would just fit, because there's not a lot of stress from the lettering, but you want it to stay in one place. But you don't have to hold it down very tightly. So if you created that recess with a couple of little wedges, here and here, you could probably do a nice job of it. So this was kind of what I was thinking. We need to decide on the wood to use. And I think we only want one type of wood. Bird's eye maple is pretty hard and it slows things down. It would be nice to have a wood with a nice grain structure that wasn't as hard.
Yeah.
We'd have to decide on how many blanks to make, and I would, if you can do 4 at a time. Oh, and I should say these 4 would probably take you about 3 hours, less than 3 hours to cut out, because you're only changing tools twice. Other than that, the machine's just running. So you could make multiples of 4, any 4 in a 3-hour time slot at the shop. I have to decide on how many lines and characters per line. I think if you wanted 2 lines, you move the first line up, you get a wider, you could probably put in 15 characters, and down on the second line, you would put in 10, and that would still, look nice. The finishing, this is a lacquer finish, a brush on lacquer. I did have to do some sanding to finish up the blank. There were some, little rough spots and a little burning. Try to get a wood that doesn't burn as readily as the maple.
A quick question on that, Peter, only because I keep looking at the pocket on this, and it's really beautiful. I mean, part of that is just the character of the bird's eye maple, but the other part of it is that you don't see any cutting, any residual marks from cutting. And obviously you probably applied a little bit of sanding, but I know that Pat has gone to great lengths to make sure that the spindle is perfectly perpendicular to the bed, which in theory means that you don't ever end up leaving lines as you make your pass. And I'm just curious, did you have to do much to get that beautiful pocket to be as smooth looking and with no evidence of the CNC milling? Did you have to do a whole lot to make it look that good?
No, it took about 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh, that's nothing.
The original design from Tools Today used a bowl gouge. It's the end mill with the radius, the corners, and that really didn't work as well. It left a little ridge here and a little ridge there, and then there was a lot more trash left around the inner edge of the lip. And when I went to the flat end mill, it took care of those problems.
That's great. That's great.
I imagine and it was a pretty new end mill too, so I imagine having a really sharp one makes a big difference.
Right. Another question. I'm looking at your roundover, and go back to your first picture again, please. That roundover is really beautiful. I mean, it is. You can't see a seam between the inside and outside. As you round the corners at the top and the bottom, it looks so good. And I'm just wondering, when you did that roundover cut, did you do it in one pass, or did you progressively move in so that it was more than one pass to get to the full roundover?
2 passes. Two passes on the inside, 2 passes on the outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that took it down on the outside to just.
On the pine, the single pass was fine.
So how far did the roundover cut go down. Your material is a ½ inch thick. So when your round over on the inside and outside was done, how deep into the material were you at that point?
Well, it was the radius of the roundover, which I think actually not quite the radius. So it's a 1/4 inch roundover.
Yep.
And basically I went not quite a 1/4 inch down.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, thanks. It looks so good. I had to hear from you exactly what steps you took, and that's really encouraging. Thank you.
A little, there's a little hand sanding at the end just to smooth everything out. But the real problem was a little bit of burning to get the black off the wood.
Yeah, which usually should be fixable with increasing your feed rate, because it's really dwelling that causes burns. Unless there are.
When you increase the feed rate, there was a lot of nasty noises coming out of it.
Is that right? Okay.
So
That may be something we need to tighten up then. But at least you were able to cut it at the slower rates, even though you had to take the burn off.
You could consider cutting it in birch. There would be a little less sugar in the wood than there is with maple.
There's that too. Yeah.
Well, maybe the larger this project should be done in the birch. Birch is a pretty light colored wood, if I remember correctly. Maybe one would use a slightly colored finish then to darken it a little.
Yeah, Peter, you know what you probably would enjoy doing? Gary has a passion for just the varieties of woods, and we have a lot of woods in stock in what they call the garage. It's really the woodshed inside of the shop. Yeah. And just having this conversation with you, he might just say, well, we've got some of this and some of that. And you might enjoy just trying a couple of different types of wood and see what the results look like and learn from that experience. But again, we have plenty of wood, and all you have to do is tap into it. But a conversation with Gary would be a good way to start that, because he knows what's there and he loves what you've done and might have some recommendations for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. What do you think about the finish? I mean, this is lacquer. Shellac is going to be a little softer, but goes on faster. Boiled linseed oil is going to be a little slower. I've never used the linseed oil myself.
Peter, I'm in no position to offer an opinion other than we had this one guy at the last general meeting.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking back on.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking to myself, jeepers, put these things into a bag of linseed oil and just leave them. Whatever his 2 or 3 super quick, super good techniques were, would probably be, again, it was easy, so why not? But somebody else had an opinion.
Well, I was going to say, if you used the linseed oil once you did the finishing, you would need to let them dry for probably a week or 2 before you tried shipping them to anybody or giving them to anybody. So that adds a long tail end time on the finishing.
Good point.
That's kind of a nuisance.
The shellac would be the fastest.
Yeah. So then I was thinking, the text is a little bit indistinct here. We could, I forget the name of that, is it a vinyl sheet, Travis, that one puts on and cuts through?
The acrylic that we use?
Yeah, acrylic. Once the blank was made and finished, you could put a piece of that on here, cut through it, and then mask off the rest. You could spray in a different color finish and then just peel everything off and you'd be done.
Yep.
You could use an orange shellac, a dark amber shellac. That would be pretty quick and
Yeah.
it would raise the contrast a little bit,
Right.
especially if you were on a lighter wood.
The resin fill, how about that?
Well,
Yeah, doing a resin pour if somebody was
Colored.
comfortable with doing that in volume.
yeah, I haven't played with resin at all. I think you have to do a little more finishing on the top of it then, don't you? I mean, you fill it with the resin and then you scrape it off and
Yes,
sand it and
exactly.
polish it.
Exactly. But let me just make a plug here because you've sort of set the stage for it. Our next general meeting on March 31st will be George Von Driska of the website Woodworkers Guild of America, WWGOA. He's
Yeah.
going to be talking about epoxy for woodworkers. And he's going to start off with, these are the basics of doing epoxy, especially as a woodworker. And then he's going to show a wide variety of use cases where he has done epoxy work. And I'm working with Mike McKelney right now, and our latest sponsor, like American Slabs or whatever they're called, on a epoxy starter kit and an epoxy starter class, so that we have the materials from our partner at a great discount, and we have a class where people can come learn to do the basics of epoxy with woodworking. And we would do that sometime, hopefully in April. So only because you set the stage so nicely, Peter, for me to make a plug, I just thought I'd take advantage of that. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to that. I'd like to learn more about epoxy, but I made some signs a few months ago for a friend in the neighborhood here. And I cut through that acrylic sheet and then just sprayed, black lacquer. And it dried in what, 45 minutes at the
On a
most.
yellow background, right?
Yes, exactly. And it was nice and shiny, and you didn't have to polish it. You didn't have to do anything except peel the vinyl off.
Yeah,
and
looked great.
the acrylic off, and it was very, very quick and easy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could experiment a little bit with that.
Also, Peter, I may have confused people here. I think you were asking me, now that I've heard you describe what you did, you were asking me about the basic contact paper that we used, not the acrylic, which is a hard plastic sheet, correct? You were leaving the paper, it's not a paper necessarily, it's sort of plastic, Oracal 615, I think is
Yeah,
what it's called.
Oracal, right.
Yeah, and that was a plastic sheet that you cut through, and then you were able to spray where the plastic had been cut, and then
Right.
you were able to peel off the plastic, and everything surrounding it was nice and clean. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, that works very well, I found. So anyway, so I'll talk with Gary about wood. How many of these things do you think we can get rid of?
Gary has managed the inventory on this with his wife Peggy for the last 3 years, and
Oh,
they're the ones who developed a sense of how many. So when you talk to him about how many as well. And at the first year of a project like this, maybe we only ask for a certain number, not knowing what the demand will be, and then we sort of can fine tune it the subsequent year.
Because for Mother's Day, we're going to have to. When is Mother's Day anyway?
May something. Anybody know?
Well, I can look it up.
Let's see who all these silent people are. Hey, are there the people out there? Hello.
Well, there aren't any mothers on the call.
People who would know the date.
It's May 9th.
I beg
May
to
9th.
differ.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess my point is, May 9th sounds like it's 2.5 months away, but it's going to go by pretty quick.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get feedback for what people want to put on it, or I guess we could have some generic message like Happy Mother's Day if people just want to, that.
Well, actually, Peter, if you wouldn't mind, you've defined the boundaries of this particular project, and we have built the website to, in theory, accommodate this kind of a request. So I'd like to suggest that what we do is we put, strictly for internal testing purposes, we put this product in the store with what we expect to be the way that people will purchase, the way people will provide the customization information, like what are the first and second line and exactly how that gets to you. We actually worked the whole flow once, and we shared the results with the people on this call, because I'm hoping that others will say, wow, I see what Peter did. Peter took CNC a few months ago, and now he's learning by taking on a project. He's helping out with the community efforts to raise funds. He's teaching other people here on this call about what's possible. And it's such a great cycle of activity that if there are others who would like to come up with a Mother's Day gift, just so they can practice making something in small volume that is also going to have the side benefit of contributing to the community and interacting with the group, et cetera. If Ed, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we could just have those tagged on to these calls as updates. so that people
Absolutely.
just see what's going on. It's a show and tell, but with a special focus on personalizable Mother's Day gifts. Here's the real backdrop on all of this, though. The idea that we could personalize something is a skill that we all want to be able to do, I suspect. And personalization also allows us to perhaps charge more for these products. Let's say that this beautiful tray of Peter's might normally go for $25. Well, maybe if it's personalized, it could go for $40. And that's got some benefits to us financially, but it's got also benefits to us from what we can learn. And if it is something we can figure out how to do well, then we can have it for Mother's Day and then Valentine's Day and then Christmas. And there are other places where, to the extent that we enjoy doing it, not beyond that, because this is all about fun, okay? But to the extent that we're enjoying doing it and learning and spending time together on this project, we can do it. And this is a test case, the Mother's Day of 2021, or as Ed likes to say, 1921.
All right, well, I'm going to stop.
I think it's going to take a while to live that one down.
I'm going to stop sharing then.
So, yeah, click up in the middle center of your screen there, Peter. Thank you.
I do have a question about that. Why would we consider doing the personalization on the laser? Because then you could cut out your hearts and then personalize them later on the laser. Would be. I know it's sacrilege to say that in this community, but that is another tool that we can use.
Can I
the same thing?
Can I share a quick sidebar? In my last laser class, there was a gentleman whose first name was Mark, and he was an endoscopic surgeon. And he said he had been using lasers from early on. So he was familiar with a variety of laser technologies. And he said early on, there was a real concern with being able to use the laser and know how deep you were cutting into whatever you were doing. Because in the early days, people were cutting through whatever they were trying to and slicing like blood vessels behind it. And so this idea of knowing how to use the laser for a variety of things, I had never come across an endoscopic surgeon who used lasers and could tell that kind of a tale. But that was kind of cool. So yes, we could certainly use lasers in this situation too. And in this particular group, Tom, I don't think you'd have a lot of pushback because we're digital tools users. It's in other parts of our community where that could still be considered a little bit of sacrilege. But I think it's a great option, and it's certainly a lot easier to set up and frame. I guess I always think about some of the experimentation that Dave Collins has done on what kinds of contrasts you could get. Let's say, for instance, that instead of putting the data in with a V-carve bit, which is, I think, classier, and if the contrast were stronger, I think it would actually look better. But you could also, if you get a good contrast from burn, some of David's first projects were on Baltic birch, and he would get some just deliciously strong contrast between where he laser etched and where he didn't. There were a variety of things that he was doing to get that. But if we didn't get a strong contrast, using Peter's notion of the Oracal as a plastic membrane that you would cut through, and probably not Oracal there because it might be vinyl, but just paper tape down, laser etch, and then not necessarily spray, but paint, you could also get contrast. So I think there are a variety of ways that we could do the customization, just depending upon, I suppose, what we're up to. I think the most involved and probably the classiest looking is the inset V-bit carving that Peter did. But if we got to any sort of volume, it's probably a lot easier to slap something into a jig on the bed of the laser and just quickly frame it and etch it. You know, that would be a very quick higher volume scenario. As several of us suggested.
Yeah, you know, jigging. You just have to have a jig that locates it and doesn't have to retain it, hold it any.
Exactly. And no friction on these babies. It just has to sit in the right spot.
Okay.
Yeah, I've actually got an example right here I can show you guys.
Oh, good.
If you want to spotlight me for a second.
Okay.
So this is a 3-inch wide.
A little further back. There you go. Oh yeah.
It's a 3-inch wide block and 2.5 inches tall. Man, it just doesn't want to focus.
It's good. It's good.
And it's very small text, but it's totally legible.
Is it just laser?
It's just laser.
Wow, that is a great.
On what wood?
This is maple.
Maple. Nice.
I think it's curly maple to be specific.
Show us the flip side just so you can show off. Look at that, people. 3D etching.
Laser etched, yeah.
So this is actually from Devil's. Well, I mean, it's the coordinates on there is where it's at in Devil's Lake
So cool.
in Wisconsin. But yeah, it's, my brother's engagement.
Do you have the original turtle anywhere nearby?
The V-Carve one?
No, the turtle that you did as when you took the laser class a few years ago, you came up with this turtle on the Baltic birch, and you had really great contrast.
Oh, the little box? No,
Yeah,
that's my office at work.
Oh, okay, good, okay. So do you have another example? Just because I know that you've done this kind of thing.
If you can wait a moment. Yeah, I can grab some.
Okay.
So one of the things I've seen on some, this is kind of getting into the laser side of things, but with wood that has maybe contrasting colors in it, just in a single piece of wood things, when you laser it, the white stuff will tend to laser with less contrast than the dark stuff. And so simple water solution with baking soda, just something about the baking soda. You spread that over the wood. You can dry it with a heat gun or whatever, wipe off the dust and laser it, and it changes the contrast incredibly, and it makes it more consistent across the wood colors.
One more thing to try.
Simple, yeah.
A
Did
question.
you do the baking soda as a powder or like as a mix?
It's a mix. It's basically you take like a cup of water and a tablespoon of baking soda, and
It's like a mordant almost for the laser.
no, it's you spray it. It's not like a paste or anything. It's just liquid. It's mostly water. It all dissolves. So it's very light spray. People just spray it out of a sprayer, a hand sprayer. Just squirt.
Interesting sidebar, Doug. I've done that on steel. Again, baking soda and water, and it's not a very strong contrast. But when you laser etch, it does change. I mean, you can actually see. I'd call it more of a ghost of an image, but I mean, you actually do end up with some residual changing in the surface coloration where you laser etched through the baking soda down to the metal. I think it had to be stainless steel, actually.
I was gonna say it might apply more to the lasers in the visual spectrum though too, because the forums that I see this used are the Orturs, the diode lasers, and the visual spectrum is going to be more sensitive to wood coloration as to the CO2 infrared stuff.
Looks like we got Dave
using the laser after finishing or before finishing. That is, if you pre-finished it with either lacquer or shellac and then come in to use a laser to do the lettering, how does that, can you do that, or do you have to?
You can do that.
You can, and it has different effects. Some lacquers and finishes will actually give you a different color than you would normally get with just a straight bare wood, blackening. I've seen some lacquers turn a really cool orange once lasered, and
cool.
It just, yeah.
Cool. And we see David back.
Yeah, so the easiest thing I could find were my name tags. So one of these is birch, or sorry, maple, and the other one's birch.
Okay.
And they're not super black and they're burned. The birch is a little darker than the maple.
But what Peter was talking about, wanting it to pop, and definitely what you have in either of your hands pops.
Yeah,
it surely does.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just nailing down the speed and power, and you can get it to be as arbitrarily dark as you want.
Well, I believe you also messed around with the lines. That is to say.
Oh yeah, the line interval for sure.
Line interval, because I remember you were taking it down to like 0.3 on something. Maybe it was the turtles.
0.03 is what I usually use.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, Peter.
The main thing that helps with is that for fine text, you don't have stair stepping in the diagonals and curves. You can get nice smooth edges.
Was that before they had the line and fill feature though in Lightburn, where all of a sudden now you can trace the outside of the vector and get rid of all those stair step?
I have not used that before, mainly because I don't want to deal with the fact that it's going to give me different artifacts for the depth of cut around
That's
the
true.
edges.
That's true.
And the fact that whenever you do a line, you have to have inaccuracies from the fact that you're swinging the arm around it and it's got to accelerate.
That's true too.
Whereas if you go back and forth, you can nail that spot every time.
Got it. Absolutely correct. Yep. Okay. Ed, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to drag things out, but this was what Peter did was such a good example of the kind of thing that we as a group could just do to learn and share and make and have fun. And so I thought it was great that he had done that. Thank you very much for doing that, Peter. And if anybody has ideas they'd like to sort of use as an excuse to practice, I make stuff and I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. I have no room for anything. So, being able to make it and get it out of my house is great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Travis, for the demonstration you brought today. And
My pleasure.
Hey, Ed, I got a couple things that I'd like to share.
Okay, Lou.
The one thing about that spindle was I have a 3 horsepower spindle on my machine, and it runs off a 20 amp circuit, and the only cooling it has is a bucket full of water with a pump in it, and they recommend putting antifreeze in it, and I asked what antifreeze was in Utah. And the other thing about the Aura mask is when you use that on small lettering, it has a habit of bleeding through into the wood, weeping into the side wood. So it's really got to be protected well when you're putting up small text.
Hey, Lou, can you pause on that just a second? Because you were the one who introduced me to Oracal going back like 3 or 4 years. It was great. And this notion about the colorant getting into the end grain is something that we've dealt with recently. I can't remember. Ed, was it on your?
Well, it was on last month's meeting. We talked about multi-pour.
Right. So the one that I have really liked, and I just wanted to share this with you, Lou, is that if you get the epoxy mix and then have that be 50% of a mix that is with acetone, it's really runny. So it doesn't, it blocks very clearly all the end grains, so there's no seepage, and yet it's so thin that it doesn't actually create a gap. It doesn't like fill in the area very much. And so I thought I'd just toss that out there because the epoxy diluted equal amount acetone made for a very good way of sealing the end grain, so you didn't have the paint getting in and sort of bleeding. But go ahead, Lou.
But I don't understand when you're doing this. Are you filling the letters with fiberglass?
What we're doing in the instance that Ed was referring to is we are putting in a colored epoxy, which we didn't want to seep into the side grain, but it could also just be paints that you didn't want to seep into the side grain. It basically just blocks it. So clear epoxy that's very runny because of the acetone is filling the end grain, and therefore whatever you put in there, be it paint, be it more epoxy that's very colored, it will not bleed into the edges. And so it's a very crisp line. You don't see any of that seepage into the side grain.
No, I get that, but are you filling the letters with epoxy and then recutting them?
In the case that Ed was talking about, yes, that was our last special interest group with the guy who was doing the multi-pour epoxy. That video is online, Lou, and really sad you missed it. It was really great.
No, I saw the video, but what Peter's talking about was just doing the text, right?
Yeah.
Masking.
Yeah, no, Lou, we wouldn't be talking about recutting the text. It would be a matter of thinning it with the thinning the epoxy with the acetone to a point where you can brush it in and let it dry real quickly, and then you go ahead and paint it whatever you need to paint it.
Well said.
It's not thick enough to fill the letters.
Well said.
Okay, I got one more thing I want to share.
Please.
You got to talk.
He's getting ready for the onslaught of the zombie.
This can be a Mother's Day gift. as a husband attitude adjuster.
That's beautiful. You have a little video of that too, don't you, Lou? You're muted.
Okay.
Yeah, the one problem I had with it, this was from, this wood was from the San Salvador. And what happened
Ship?
was it split. Yeah, it's white oak. It's very hard. This thing weighs 4 pounds. So I don't know how legal it'd be in Little League. But you can see the end that I knocked it off when the router cut it because of the split in the wood. So I'm trying to graft another piece of white oak
Oh.
back on it.
Yeah.
And, but it came out really nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
The only one on this call that has a spindle on a CNC that's anywhere near that large.
Yep. Okay, well, I am going to bring it to an end right now. I want to thank everybody for their contributions to this, and we will be posting this video and look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, everybody.
Sounds
Thanks a
good.
lot.
Okay, be safe.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.